autonomy. We want to establish the conditions for Afrikaners to stay in South Africa in order for us to make a sustainable contribution towards the country and all its people. We did not come to Africa as Afrikaners. Centuries ago, our ancestors came here from various countries in Europe. But we became Afrikaners here long before the birth of South Africa as a country. Our language and our culture are indigenous to Africa. We named ourselves, our language and our culture and many of our institutions after Africa. Afrikaners are a self-defined cultural community, a people, and not simply a language group or a racial group. We emphasize that through Afrikaans we have also bond through our common language with the majority of so-called colored South Africans, as well as with a significant number of people from other South African communities. We respect these other communities and will cooperate and have been cooperating with them in many appropriate issues. We are committed to South Africa and the continent. We may disagree with the ANC, but we love the country. As in any community, there are individuals who wish to immigrate, but the repatriation of Afrikaners as refugees is not a solution for us. We want to build a future in South Africa and have minimum living conditions that we will set and work towards. If the international community helps us create an environment where Afrikaners can sustainably remain in South Africa, we can make a lasting contribution towards the well-being of the country and all its people. Our loyalty to the country is as steadfast as our legitimate pursuit of cultural freedom and the abolishing of racial discrimination against us. This commitment to our country and cultural freedom is outlined in the Afrikaner Declaration, which was signed and introduced last year along with many other community leaders in the Afrikaner community. The Solidarity Movement, specifically Solidarity and Afriforum, will immediately begin to develop proposals to resolve disputes over issues like expropriation and race-based policies. We will announce more information on that soon. I want to conclude with the Afrikaner Declaration, and I am only going to focus on the 12 key areas that was outlined last April. The first one, the first point of the Afrikaner Declaration was that we say we are an indigenous cultural community connected to Africa. Secondly, we want to stay here and contribute to the welfare of the country and all its people. Thirdly, we believe that cooperation is in the interest of everyone's freedom, safety and prosperity. Fourthly, we build to stay in South Africa. Whether it is a technical college or a university, we want to build to stay in South Africa. Then we believe that cultural freedom is a condition for democratic freedom. Point 6, we endorse the equality of everyone in South Africa, including all the other communities. Point 7, we believe that differences about the past must not destroy the future of us all. Point 8, our view is that the Constitution recognizes the pursuit of the cultural autonomy we are striving towards. Point 9, we endorse unity and diversity. Point 10, it is also necessary for us to be able to give input to the government. Point 11, we want to contribute to the economic empowerment of all South Africans because we are well aware of the unemployment and the poverty and the issues of many people in South Africa. And lastly, we want to conclude a cultural accord with the government to settle all these matters that I've mentioned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes, thank you, Flip. Thank you for the media.
Can you move this side for
Okay, should I make a forced removal for Flip?
Yes. Eviction. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, members of the media that are present, as well as media watching via our live stream, also internationally. But I specifically want to address Afriforum members, and of course that also applies to Solidarity members and the members of all the institutions of the Solidarity movement. Of course, then also supporters of the Solidarity movement. I want to thank you for your support. Well, for a long time now, it's you that makes it possible for us to play a positive role to build a future in this country where Afrikaners can, and their generations to come, can have a future built on prosperity, freedom, and safety. So we will continue that. That is, of course, based on a basis of mutual recognition and respect with all other communities in this country. And we cannot have a future if there's not good relations between the various cultural communities. And that, as you know, as Afriforum members, you also make it possible for us to have agreements with various other cultural communities in this country, to say that we can cooperate despite government, despite the political behavior of many of the leaders in this country. I want to start off by saying we blame President Cyril Ramaphosa, as well as senior ANC leaders, as well as some people in government, for what is happening now. This is indeed a crisis. We try to avert this crisis. Some of you might know, in April last year, we wrote a letter to President Ramaphosa urging him not to sign the Expropriation Act, saying what we believe the problems in the Act are. And by the way, those problems are not fabricated. If you believe it is fabricated, go and read Section 12.3 of the Act, which allows expropriation with no compensation. Of course, Deputy President Mashatile said in October last year that no compensation and expropriation without compensation is the same thing. We try to avert this. We also stated in our letter to the President that this will harm international relations, it will harm investments in the country, and we hoped and asked that he would refer the Expropriation Act back to Parliament. But I must say, our proposal was treated with disdain, because to this day we have not received any response from the President. So we try to avert this. If somebody is to blame, it's the President and senior ANC leaders. Also with regard to the Bella Act, and you will know that President Trump mentioned some sectors of the community are being treated very badly, as he stated it. The fact is, the Bella Act is the worst thing any government can do to a section of its population. Afrikaners don't have traditional areas where our language and culture can thrive and exist. Schools, Afrikaans schools, plays a prominent role in our cultural existence. And therefore, an attack on Afrikaans schools is an attack on our cultural existence. And by sending out this message to the world, as well as the US, that this government is allowing a certain section of the population to be targeted, then it is not our fault. The President, as well as senior ANC leaders, should take full responsibility for that. Afriforum, Solidarity, and the Solidarity movement try to solve this targeting of our community through the Bella Act, through constructive discussions. Solidarity had at NETLAC negotiations. As you know, Solidarity is a trade union, but Dirk can speak for himself just now. And there was an agreement that was also signed by the presidency. And we hoped we could avert this situation. And we were then again treated to disrespect by the president, publicly denying that the presidency was involved. And that, of course, is not the actions of a president that has the interests of the country at heart. It's not a president that is loyal to all the people of this country. It's a president that places his own party's interest above the interests of normal South Africans, and not only Afrikaners. And therefore, our cultural relationship person, Barend Ace, has already this morning started to engage with various cultural communities and traditional leaders. It is now time that we build the future in a network of communities, and we can do this despite government. Those are the issues. Then, of course, we are proudly part of the Solidarity Movement, and as our chairperson Flip Buys mentioned, we see our future in Africa. Our people, in Afrikaans, the Afrikaner folk, became a people here on the southern tip of Africa. We did not develop elsewhere. We are not Europeans. You had Germans, Europeans, Dutch coming to the southern tip of Africa as Europeans, but we became a people here. We are indigenous to this people and to this country, and we are going nowhere. We want to also show appreciation to President Trump, as well as of course the US government, for recognizing and identifying the discrimination that Afrikaners are experiencing through racial legislation, through the BLA Act, through threats to property rights. Of course, hopefully that will help to also urge the various parties also in this country to go to the negotiation table to find amicable solutions that's in the interest of all in the country. So that we will do, but we have to state categorically, we don't want to move elsewhere. We are not going to ask our children now to move to another country. The fact is, our ancestors worked hard to make sure that we as a people are formed here on the southern tip of Africa. We're not going to disrespect that. We also have the interests of future generations in mind. We also have to make sure that our culture is transferred to future generations. And that cannot be done abroad. You cannot, in the long term, or there's a real risk, if you go to another country now, there's a real risk that your grandchildren will not say to you in the morning, "Hello, Opa." They would say something like, "Hi, Granddad," or something in that respect. And that we don't want. That is why we are committed to find solutions locally. What are those solutions? I think there's a two-pronged approach. Flip Buys mentioned the Afrikaner Declaration. In the first place, Afrikaners want recognition as a group, not privilege. We want to be, as anybody else, recognized as first-class citizens in our country of birth. That can be done in various ways, and I'll mention the proposals we have just now. Then, of course, we also have to solve the problems of the country as a whole and the other cultural communities. In my discussions with Barend Ace, he has mentioned the huge problems that are experienced in traditional communities, where there's a lack of mother tongue education, where land is owned by the government, and they refuse to make sure that those communities can have access to land. And this argument that these issues will be solved by the Expropriation Act is not true. The fact is, government does not provide land for communities. They take it for themselves, and they give permission for somebody to use it, and they can kick them off. So that's nationalization of land. And so this act will not solve that. It will worsen that. The government's land reform program has failed dismally. Why? Because they don't give property rights to people that get their land. And if you don't have a title deed, you cannot go to a bank and get funding, and therefore you are set up for failure. So government has set up black people for failure on farms in this country, and to their own acknowledgement, 90% of these farms are failing. So for that, this government also needs to take responsibility. There is a land restitution program that we are in favor of, people that lost their land unfairly and was not compensated. In terms of that program, why does it fail? This government loves to blame other people for what's going wrong, to hide their own responsibility. When we saw last Monday what was happening in the country, the president did not come out and say, well, we will address these issues, things that we've done that we think can be changed. No, they tried to get the scapegoats. Now it was Afriforum's fault. You know, people used to always blame Jan van Riebeeck, but this week Jan van Riebeeck had an opportunity to rest. It was now all Afriforum's fault. And also with regard to land, the government should take its responsibility for what is going wrong. In the restitution process, we've seen corruption. We've seen land being given to people that are connected to the ruling party, and we saw administrative chaos in that regard. The government has 4,000 farms, owns the largest chunk of land in this country, but again, without acknowledging that land can be used to take on inequalities in the country. They're now saying, well, white people, as they call it, don't want to be described in a racial term, we are Afrikaners. They say we own the most land in the country, which is false. It's the biggest part of what we see, or 20% of the country as a whole, the biggest part of commercial farming land. But commercial farming land is a small portion, because what is not seen as commercial farming land is traditional land that, of course, is not developed because people there are set up for failure. There are lots of other land owned by government which they refuse to transfer. So those are the issues. So don't come with false propaganda, and I'm not speaking to you, of course. We love the media, we believe in freedom of the press. We are speaking specifically to those that now create some crisis and say now we have to go and disrespect property rights. It will create more problems than those they are trying to solve. We've seen in Zimbabwe, it did not bring prosperity that everybody in Zimbabwe now have land. We've seen hyperinflation, we've seen millions of people leaving Zimbabwe. We have seen the economic collapse, and we are seeing people that are unemployed at the moment in Zimbabwe. We can be partners to help solve this land issue, but we are tired of being made the scapegoat for everything that is going wrong in the country. Then with regard to solving other problems in the land, in the country, we believe that we can assist. Afriforum has 165 branches countrywide and 177 neighborhood watches that are active in local communities to make sure that we fix roads, that we make sure communities get water, and that we make sure we clean up our towns. And that is, of course, to the benefit of everybody in those towns. And we will continue to do that as part of building relationships. What is our proposals? We believe there should be an amendment act with regard to both the Bella Act as well as the Expropriation Act. We believe the government should review its foreign policy. The two biggest trade partners of South Africa, the biggest one is, of course, China. The second one is the US. And as a country where our economy is only 0.4% of the world economy, we have to make sure that we benefit as much as we can in the interest of people in this country. What we are unfortunately seeing is a government that has moved away from a policy of neutrality. We need to be neutral so that we can trade with both China and the US. But of course, I don't have to give the list. We mentioned it yesterday at another media conference, but we've seen a move towards anti-Western, anti-US sentiments, and we now are reaping the terrible fruits of that foreign policy that we have. The cultural code is necessarily, Dirk will speak about the 141 pieces of race legislation in the country. And of course, one important thing is hate speech. If you're going to allow people to sing Kill the Boer, and everybody is just saying, no, this is not literal, this is figuratively speaking. Well, the actions we are going to face now, because of this kind of hateful conduct, is not going to be figurative, it's going to be literally. We are literally going to see that. And we expect government to take a stance against that. The president has been silent when a section of the population have to hear that they had to be killed. And that is, of course, what is leading to what we are seeing now. Other solutions with regard to safety, the biggest murder rate in the country, everybody suffers. We are committed with our neighborhood watchers to cooperate to make sure that we get a safer country. Corruption. The US has written a letter to the government a few years ago already, saying that investment is hindered by corruption in the country. We've seen in the Zondo Commission how many people have been involved in state capture, and you don't have to be good in maths to be able to count how many people have been prosecuted. Nearly none. And that sends out a message to any country that they won't want to invest here. You know, even the ANC, if you look at their members or leaders that are mentioned in the Zondo Commission, 97 of them, only 34 have had to appear in front of the Integrity Commission. This is not a government that is serious about tackling corruption. In local communities, we will continue to work with all communities there, with municipalities, and we want to see specifically as a partner in this. Government, sometimes in municipalities, they are willing to see it fail. They are willing to see that contaminated water goes to townships and suburbs simply because they don't want to cooperate with anybody else. That needs to change. We need to promote mother tongue education for all. That is the biggest injustice against all the people of this country, is that only Afrikaans and English-speaking people, and if Bella is implemented as Mr. Lessufi wants it, it will only be English people that will have mother tongue education. We need to make sure that is, we actually build it to all communities. That is an injustice also towards other communities. And then we want to say we want to build a culture of human rights in the country. But again, this what I said might be harsh words, but we believe the realities should be put on the table. And when we have these realities, it creates the platform for us to sit calmly and say, what can we do about it? Afriforum, and I believe the Solidarity Movement, reaches out the hand of friendship to the people in this country. We indicate that we want to find amicable solutions and an understanding with the South African government, and we hope that they would also participate so that we can avert the current crisis we are in. I'm going to move that.
Thank you very much. I want to start to re-emphasize that the United States response to South Africa and President Trump's executive order has nothing to do with Solidarity and Afriforum, but everything to do with the reckless domestic, foreign and diplomatic policies of the ANC. Solidarity also wants to reaffirm its commitment to the country. Our members work here and want to stay here, and they are going to stay here. We are committed to build a future here. We are not going anywhere. We are committed to dialogue. However, the ANC leaders has made dialogue difficult by breaching trust when it signed the Bella Act and through the dishonorable way it handled the Netlak agreement on Bella. Kalikru also referred to that. There was no form of loyalty or integrity towards us in that specific process. Solidarity represents ordinary workers. The G20 summit places South Africa in the spotlight. And this could be a major investment opportunity that addresses unemployment, poverty, and inequality. Or it could be an investment disaster. The US focus on South Africa will expose the country's reckless domestic policy to the world. The ANC's foreign policy exposes all of us in South Africa. The group most affected by this exposure is workers. The world's largest economy and one of South Africa's biggest trade partners has been alienated by the ANC leaders. And this was not the fault of Afriforum or Solidarity, but of the ANC. For the past 3 years, it has been clear that the Americans are displeased with South Africa's closer ties with countries such as China, Russia, and Iran. South Africa's case against Israel has further contributed to this, and there are numerous other examples. But this is a diplomatic battle between countries. But one consequence of the ANC's foreign policy is that South Africa could be expelled from AGOA. So their diplomatic stance has effects on us and on our members. South Africa currently enjoys extremely favorable trade relations with the US, especially through AGOA. And in 2024, more than 10% of all South African exports went to the USA. Exports worth approximately 156 billion rand were sent to the US, while only 120 billion rand worth of goods and services were imported from the USA. But here's the irony. Solidarity has conducted a comprehensive foreign campaign. What to do to protect AGOA, and the irony, despite of the ANC. We have encountered incredible hostility towards the ANC in the USA, but we have constantly maintained that pressure should be placed on the ANC, and specifically the ANC leaders, so that we can ensure that ordinary South Africans are not punished. And that is why we ask the US not to kick South Africa out of AGOA. And this remains our position up to now. And for the past 2 years, Solidarity has been working with the US Embassy in South Africa, as well as the Office of the US Trade Representative in Washington, D.C., to build a strong case for the renewal of AGOA when this law expires later this year. Over the past 2 years, we have participated in numerous discussions regarding AGOA's renewal or extension. During 3 visits to Washington, we also canvassed support among members of the US Congress for the extension of AGOA. And we plan to travel to the US again in September this year to try to safeguard AGOA for South Africa. This is loyalty towards the country, despite the action of the ANC. And this brings me then to South Africa's racial policies. These, along with expropriation, are central themes for the US. South Africa is going against the global trade and global trends. We are the most race-regulated country in the world. After 30 years, it has become evident that these policies have done nothing to address unemployment and inequality. On the contrary, the cost of black economic empowerment has disadvantaged South African workers, 90% of whom are black and 10% white. Solidarity recently published a report showing that Eskom's procurement costs are approximately 30% higher due to BEE-related premiums. All South Africans have paid the price for this, and the same will likely be true for the broader South African economy. Later this year, the Solidarity Research Institute will publish a report specifically on this issue. Black economic empowerment destroys jobs and creates inequality. And that is why global standards are very clear. Race-based programs must be temporary. This is explicitly stated in the United Nations Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination and the International Labour Organization's Convention 111. Now, Solidarity and the government also reached a historic agreement under the supervision of the International Labour Organization that race-based programs must be temporary. And despite all of this, and despite the stance of the US, Minister Parkstow has announced that the BEE regulations will be made stricter and that a 100 billion rand race fund will be established by imposing additional tax on the private sector. Public hearings will soon be held to implement stricter sectoral race requirements. This is not only detrimental to white South Africans, but will also be devastating for foreign investment, economic growth and job creation. The US stance is forcing South Africa to rethink its racial policies. South Africa can no longer hide its aggressive racial policies. The government has done nothing to meet the international requirements. They are driving away investors and preventing new investments, and then acting surprised when the international community opposes their stance. Before the G20 summit, South Africa must present a plan to phase out its racial policies. Solidarity will announce more details on this next week. If we examine South Africans' reckless foreign and domestic policies, we naturally consider their effect on our community. But above all, we consider the impact on the country. It's not only President Trump or Afrikaners who should be angry at the ANC, it's South Africa. Therefore, we say, President Ramaphosa, let's talk. Although there's a breach of trust, we must find each other because we don't go anywhere. We are together here, the southern tip of Africa, and must learn mutual recognition and respect. Thank you.
Thank you to Flip, and thank you to Kali, and thank you for Bert. We would now allow our time for questions. We would ask that you state the name of your institution, to state your name as well, and then to state your question. Before we begin, we would just want to settle down again, and if you would mind us that I don't think in us answering the questions, whomever would be questioning, and you can pose your question to whomever speaker on the panel. We won't be able to shift with regards to all of the questions, so we will do our best to answer as loudly and clearly as we can where we are seated. So there's a question at the front here, number one, and then just at the back, the gentleman at the back, second, Raymond. First here.
Yes, my name is Sophie Mkwena. I'm international news editor at the South African Broadcasting Corporation. This question and the one that will follow will be directed to both Afriforum and Solidarity. One, there was injustice knitted against the black majority in the country. The UN, all member countries, declared apartheid as a crime against humanity. We know the policy of apartheid was to exclude the black African majority. The negotiations where all groups were included, including the Afrikaners, who took an initiative to reach out to the leadership that was in exile, agreed on the redress of the imbalance of the past. 30 years down the line, South Africa is the most unequal society, with the previously disadvantaged even worse. How do you think should the government that has been given responsibility to address concerns of all citizens, irrespective of color, creed, or political inclination, address this injustice? Secondly, the issue, the word expropriation, it's there in the Constitution. Yes, the interpretation and all of that. And President Trump is reacting to the word expropriation. And it was there for donkey years. What's your view in terms of after it was included? Expropriation with compensation, and if there's no agreement to expropriate without compensation, we know it's there. Expropriation with no compensation, it's there in the Constitution. It's the question of implementation. And lastly, there's a farm, this is from my colleagues in Limpopo. There's a farm in Limpopo where there's a dispute. It's called Ackerland Broedery. Apparently it was compensated. What is the status of the Ackerland farm in Limpopo? Was it expropriated without compensation too? Did Afriforum refer to it in its communication with the US? And those are my questions. Thanks.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I will start with the answer, and then Kari and Dirk will continue. I want to say that we do not deny the past of racial discrimination in the country and the enduring effects thereof. What I want to say is that we have repeatedly said that we are willing to help with the redress. But you can't help with redress, for example, on local municipality level, if you are excluded. And many of the race-based policies exclude us from contributing to taking the countries forward. So, secondly, I want to say that we believe that the best equalizer is economic growth, because a rising tide raises all ships. And we have seen after 30 years, like you have mentioned, that South Africa is even worse off. Now, the success of a policy, the test is not whether it sounds politically good or politically necessary, but whether it works. And we say today that it doesn't work, and we need new policies. We can't do only more of the same. So, in the beginning it was about redress, we believe, but it now has a permanent character, much more about representativity than about redress. So, lastly, from my side, the Motlanthe report clearly states what the problem of the redistribution of land is, and the responsibility lies with government and with failures with the whole process, not with the farmers.
Yes, I just want to add on what Flip said. about policies that are implemented but simply has not the effect that it is supposed to have. You refer to it 30 years after the implementation of affirmative action and black economic empowerment policies. We've seen a sharp rise in the jobless figure in South Africa. We've seen a sharp rise in inequality. That means simply that these policies are not working. So the question is, what can we do to improve on that, because South Africa needs a more equal country? We, as a worker representative organization, experience that every day. Just the past week, we were involved in retrenchment negotiations again. In about all the retrenchment negotiations is done in companies where there was successful black ownership transfers. That means thus that there was success for a couple of elite in the empowerment processes. But as workers, black and white, are paying a price. And the price that we pay is because of a 20% to 30% premium that is paid in black economic empowerment transactions. That is money that is drew from the South African economy that led to less growth, less employment, more inequality. And that is the reason why the international norm for race policies are quite clear. And that is, it must be temporary. Because a long-term race policy has a detrimental effect on economic growth. And Malaysia, very good example of that. They have a policy that if there is a specific percentage of economic growth, if it fell lower than a specific percentage, then the policy is stopped, because they know it has a negative effect. So that is why we say it must be phased out. It does not work simply because we believe in an economy that must grow. There must be foreign investments so that we can create jobs. There's no way that this is the case because of the current black economic empowerment policies.
Let me just give you one statistic. Of all the people in the country under the age of 18 years, only 4.6% are white. Let me repeat that. Of all the people under 18 in the country, according to Statistics South Africa, only 4.6% are white. How on earth is all the racial laws, about 140 in total, how on earth is it going to help the nearly 96% black children? So we believe it is important to address inequality, to address unemployment, to address poverty. But we don't believe these policies, if you look at the results, we believe these policies have failed, and we do not need more of the same, we need new policies.
Yes, thank you so much. Let me just add to that. AfriForum is committed to fighting poverty as I move. Okay. I'll expropriate Flip's seat, but I'll compensate him later. We are committed to fighting poverty and joblessness in the country, and it does not help you just do it by lip service, as we hear from government. That is why AfriForum has gone into an extensive program with very little resources to cooperate in rural communities with the poorest of the poor, in traditional communities, to use the concept of self-sufficiency. In Xhosa, it's vukuzenzele, where you go and say, stand up and do it yourself. And we promote that concept within communities, because when you have a government that fails to do it, the communities should take their future into their own hands. And that we've done, and by the way, communities where this is successful is where women take charge. That's why also my house is successful, because my wife takes charge. But apart from that, they say, well, we're going to uplift our community. And that is why, for instance, the Barlong Buseleka community, Khosikhabu Moroka, we have the vegetable program, a winter wheat program, indigenous goat stud program, where the community says we are going to take on this. This we do. When we ask government for assistance, we get nothing. So with regard to inequalities, we are doing what we can, but what is government doing to tackle inequalities and joblessness and poverty? What government is doing is not to take on SATU that has a grip on schools that means schools fail. That is why we have 80% dysfunctional schools. And if you have children going to a dysfunctional school, you have half the children that went to school 12 years ago not getting to matric. How are those children going to compete if they don't have the adequate education in the knowledge economy? So if we are going to say why are we failing, it's a government that does not focus on education. That they do more harm by not wanting to bring in mother tongue education, actually destroying mother tongue education. That is the reason why we are still struggling after 30 years. I'm not denying anything that helped in the past, but we need to now say, what are we going to do now? We cannot change what happened, but we can change what we are doing now. In terms of restitution, I've mentioned. There are programs, there's 7% of land is available on the open market anytime. But what have we seen? Incompetent, corrupt handling of the restitution process. That is the problem with inequalities. In terms of funding, we've seen the Zondo Commission. People that should help to fight poverty and inequalities enriching themselves. I don't have to go into that with regard to self-enrichment. What is happening also with regard to issues like BEE, we've always said, and for a number of years, let's tackle poverty by using poverty as the measure to address that. If you're going to race programs and you're simply chasing racial numbers, that is why you have the same people benefiting again and again and again because they are more equipped, and you don't have black people from townships and rural communities benefiting. The elite will benefit again and again and again. Even if you look at the rugby team, you will find the racial numbers are children. I'm not saying that. They're men. They'll hurt me if I say they're children. But they come from private schools, which is great. But what happens to those children that are in a township school? But if you're going to have a pure racial focus and not a focus on economic position, we are not going to solve this. That's why we agree with Solidarity that these racial programs lead to further inequality. With regard to the cadre deployment program, the ANC has the state resources. Well, there should not be a mix between party and state, but unfortunately we know that is happening. They have the state resources to address, especially in local communities and local municipalities. But they decided to give those jobs to their friends, and that is why the people of Paris have worms in their water. They can't drink their water. In the townships, that's why we started a program of cooperation with them, Metsi Pompong, to try and solve that. That's just with regard to the inequalities. So one cannot blame anybody else but government. Then, with regard to the Constitution, expropriation, I can't speak on behalf of Mr. Trump, and like many people see, he makes his own decisions. So I don't know what he sees as expropriation. I don't think that the problem is the word expropriation. Every country in the world has an expropriation act. So it's a fallacy that we don't recognize that. But what is different their act does not have the clause no compensation or expropriation without compensation. And that is the huge difference. You might say there are other countries that do have it. Yes, Venezuela and Zimbabwe. And we've seen what the results of that is. With regard to Ackerland, thank you for asking that question. In 2017, a terrible thing happened here at the St. George's Hotel. The ANC in their conference decided to change the constitution and make expropriation without compensation possible. That harmed the country severely. Then, of course, there was this drive. But before expropriation without compensation, the constitution was changed. It sent out a message to some in government that they can now start the process. So then there was a list of 195 farms that would be expropriated without compensation. Fortunately, there was a whistleblower that gave us that list, and we made it public. There was denial by government as that it doesn't exist, and what in the end, the first name on that list was Ackerland. And a month after that list, Ackerland was expropriated. And what just happened, the owner just received the letter, sorry, it's not your land anymore. With Afriforum's assistance, we went to court, and within 7 days, we were able to overturn that expropriation. The amount, it was not without compensation, but it was far below market value, and that is why we fought that. We overturned that in court. It was again corrupt people that was involved in this development special economic zone in Limpopo that wanted this land for the Chinese, not for some traditional community that wanted access to land. So we fortunately stopped that. So the fact that that was not expropriated is not because of the goodwill of government, is that Afriforum had to spend a lot of money to stop that. And we will continue to assist people where this unfairness happens. But you can imagine if this act now allows this to happen in 200 places on one time. We don't necessarily have the resources, and that is why we want to stop that. Now, people would say, well, the constitution was not changed, which is, of course, correct, fortunately. But it's not because the ANC decided they did not want to change it anymore. It was because they did not succeed. But why are we saying the threat is not gone? After that, the then Minister of Justice, Ronald Lamola, was quoted to say, we did not succeed to change the constitution, but don't worry, we will simply use our majority to make sure that we expropriate without compensation. That is what was said. So if one blames Afriforum or Solidarity, I said it at the previous time, the Americans can read. They've got an embassy here that follows what's going on. They've got a State Department. So if they hear Ronald Lamola saying, well, we'll just use our majority to expropriate without compensation, they're going to believe him. And then the people making those statements should take full responsibility for the consequences.
Thank you, Kali. We are pressed for time. So that we can answer further questions and do further interviews should there be any. So Raymond, after Raymond we will close, but we will remain here to address other questions as well.
Raymond from the Federation, you mentioned that you want to go to the US and speak to politicians that side. Is there a timeline of where you go and I think it's this was
Yeah.
Is there a timeline for when you go to the US and when you speak to the people on that side? And then my second question is, are you concerned that Trump's accents might have repercussions for East Afrikaner communities, because there might be some that blame the whole thing that Trump did on Afrikaners because it's based on, it's false information that Trump said. And also, do you think that this might also add further fuel to racial tension in South Africa? And then another question is, don't you think perhaps it's hypocritical on your side to go and ask Trump, that bad things is happening here and about the Expropriation Act, where when Trump this week, when he made an announcement that he will go to Gaza and somehow go and displace them and take their property. And then another one I'm going to ask is Afrikaans. Don't kill it, the policy is so bad outside.
Firstly, I want to state that we are planning to go later on this month to the United States and to talk to leaders of the United States and to give them a proper perspective of the facts of what's really happening in South Africa. Part of that is, of course, we will tell them that we don't see large-scale land grabs, and so on. But we will also tell them if there's some threats to our human rights and to the human rights of other people in South Africa. We will also ask them, like we have said, not to kick South Africa out of AGOA and not to stop, aid money that can help vulnerable people in South Africa. Secondly, of course, we are concerned about the impact on Afrikaners. Many people are very negative about what's happening in the country. Over the past, say for example, since the Zuma years, they were very negative. And we don't want people to immigrate. We are a relatively small cultural group, and we want to convince our people that there is still a future for them in South Africa. That is also why we want to engage with the South African government and with the United States, because we are looking at what is necessary for our people to stay in South Africa sustainably, in order for them to make a sustainable contribution towards the country and all its people. And one of that minimum preconditions is, according to our view and many international research, is Afrikaans schools, Afrikaans universities and so on. Any culture need schools and also other institutions to take its culture forward towards the new generation. Then, with regard to your question about racial tension, of course, if there's remarks and Afriforum are wrongly, accused of being the reason for that kind of remarks, of course it can increase racial tension. That is why we want to use this opportunity to put the facts on the table, and that is that we can take no responsibility for the utterances of American politicians. We don't know where they get the information from. We are willing, for example, to give you the information, for example, about the AGOA Act that we have been giving the Americans over the years, and you will see that information is, every one of them are positive about South Africa, and we ask them to keep us in AGOA. Yeah, and with regard to Mr. Trump's visits, I have no comment on his visits and his plans. I can only read the newspapers on that. I mean, he's the President of the United States. He can perhaps go where he wants to. What we see and what we say is that international relations, good relations between countries are very important, between any countries. We don't need even more hotspots in the world. So we would like to appeal to people is to focus on ending current wars in the world, and to focus on improving the relationships between states. And that is also why we want to urge the South African and the United States governments to talk to each other and to settle their differences and to continue with the good relations. We think we need each other, and also we are willing to do what we can to improve the relationships with the Americans.
Thank you, Flip. Yes.
We actually have two questions. Let me just quickly get it. So it was posed by Sindisu Klambati from the Gauteng Network, and he asked, what's your position on Elon Musk's perceived influence on the US president with regards to the blocked investment?
No, really, we have no information, exact information on what his influence is, so really we haven't got comments about that. I only think that if Starlink is kept out of South Africa, it is because of the policies. It is to the detriment of the really poor people in South Africa. I think what this country needs is access, cheap and affordable and dependable access for everyone, especially in the rural communities. And I think that policies that keep a company like Starlink out of South Africa, also because we need competition with the other cell phone companies that ask a lot. People, especially poor people, can't access the internet like they need to. They can't get the information, the students, school children, and so on. So I think it's important that we do not have policies that keep South Africa, that keep companies like Starlink out of South Africa. I think it leads to disempowerment. I think not. It doesn't lead to empowerment.
Look, can I just add to that, if I may? I think the question if you want to solve a problem is not asking what have somebody else done. You can say what have we done and how can we solve it. And what somebody else does, we can't change. And therefore, what the role of Elon Musk is or not, we don't know, and we cannot change it. But we can change what people in this country are doing. We should rather ask not what Elon Musk's influence was. We should ask what was President Ramaphosa's influence when he signed the Expropriation Act, when he signed the Bela Act, when again in his State of the Nation address stated how they are going to take on Israel and they are not remaining neutral. We should ask those questions. What is the impact of that and not what is the impact of Elon Musk?
Thank you, Carl. I think with that we must end the media conference now. We thank you all present for attending. En dan vir die lewende uitsending, dankie vir al ons lede, vir al ons ondersteuners dat julle hierdie lewende uitsending saam met ons meegemaak het. Ons dankie en geseënde naweek.
Sorry to the members of the media, just take note that the statement that I handed out earlier was mistakenly dated 8 February 2024. That should however be 2025. The second document that I handed out refers to the 19th of April 2024, which is the Afrikaner Declaration of last year. That date is indeed correct, as that was distributed last year. But the statement is fortunate.